Harlan Brooks pushed open the door of a roadside BBQ he technically owned, though no one inside would know it tonight. The neon sign above promised what his grandfather once swore by real smoke, real tradition. Since 1985, he kept his head down, ordered brisket. The young waitress, Emily, beamed and chirped, 15 minutes sugar. 15. His chest tightened. Brisket demanded 12 hours, not 15 minutes. He tried to swallow suspicion as the plate arrived to quickly meet glistening under the light's scent, thick but wrong, sharp chemical. He forced a bite. It tasted of smoke but hollow like a memory rewritten. When he asked the secret, Emily leaned close, playful as if sharing a joke. That flavor comes from a spray bottle now. Way faster. Harlan froze, fork suspended. The brisket in his mouth felt less like food and more like betrayal. Before the bitterness of that spray bottle, Harlan's mind carried him back to Texas heat, where he first learned what smoke meant. He was a boy then, barefoot in dust, standing beside his grandfather's pit. Logs of hickory snapped in fire, sending ribbons of blue-gray into the summer air. The old man's hands were steady carving brisket with a patience that seemed older than time itself. Smoke doesn't just soften meat, his grandfather told him, voice roughened by decades of wood and flame. It softens the heart, too. If you rush it, you break trust. The lesson sank deep. Harlan nodded solemnly, a child carrying a vow heavier than he knew. He promised to protect that tradition, to never let shortcuts poison it. That memory, warm and sharp with wood smoke, would become the bedrock of every choice he made until tonight, when betrayal sat steaming on his plate. Years passed, and Harlan grew into a man with calloused hands and stubborn resolve. He started with a shack beside a Texas highway, little more than tin walls and a pit smoker built from scraps. He rose before dawn, tended fires, hauled water, and served strangers with the pride of a man building something from nothing. Every slab of meat was brushed with patience, every customer treated as kin. Success came slow, but it came. Lines formed, word spread, and soon one roadside shack grew into 2, then 10, then more. He expanded across state lines, each store built on the same creed he had lived as a boy: real smoke, real flavor. The slogan wasn't marketing, it was blood oath. And when Harlan finally became CEO of a company stretching across the map, he still saw himself as the man who once handed out plates from a shack's window. Among all the faces that passed through those years, one stayed constant: Linda Parker. She began as a nervous cashier in a modest store, fumbling change with trembling hands. But Linda learned fast. 15 years hardened her into the company's backbone, steady and unflinching through fire drills, lawsuits, and sudden storms of public opinion. When crisis struck, it was Linda who steadied the wheel, her loyalty never up for debate. Harlan trusted her more than board members, more than lawyers, more than anyone still left around him. To him, Linda was proof that loyalty could be as enduring as oak. She wasn't just a vice president. She was his anchor, his conscience when ambition burned too hot. And though she had no idea what he'd seen tonight, she would soon be the only ally standing between him and the slow corruption gnawing at the heart of his empire. Frank Dawson had stood over pits longer than most employees had been alive. 2 decades of smoke lived in his clothes, his skin, his voice. He once commanded kitchens with quiet authority, teaching younger cooks how to read the fire the way a farmer reads the sky. But lately, the fire had been taken from him. He had been reassigned to lighter duties, inventory checks, supply lists, menial tasks that kept him out of the kitchen. Co-workers whispered about him like a relic Frank's been pushed aside. Yet every evening when shifts ended and others left, Frank stayed near the old smoker in back. He would stare at embers glowing faintly, listening to the soft crackle as if it still spoke to him. Though the company's pulse was shifting, Frank's heart beat with oak and hickory. To Harlan, Frank embodied the tradition now slipping from his grasp, proof that authenticity was being quietly exiled. If Frank was the memory of the company's past, Emily Carter was its innocence. Just 6 months in, she worked with unshaken enthusiasm, racing from table to table with a smile that disarmed even the grumpiest trucker. She didn't know about contracts, policies, or hostile boardrooms. She knew Tip's laughter and keeping glasses filled before they emptied. Her words the night before had been careless, almost playful. The smoke. We just spray it now. So much faster. She never imagined that a throwaway comment would shatter the world of the man she'd served, yet her honesty was pure, free of calculation. She had no reason to lie, and in that innocence lay the seed of revelation. Harlan had built his empire on a promise. Emily had pierced it with a sentence unwittingly setting in motion the storm that would soon engulf them all. Where Emily carried light, Richard Hale carried shadows. He was regional director, a man whose polished shoes and sharp suits mirrored his language, efficient, calculated, cold. In every meeting, his refrain never changed. We must modernize. We must streamline. His reports dazzled graphs, sloping upward margins tightening neatly. To outsiders, he looked like the kind of leader investors craved. Inside the stores, whispers told another story. Employees muttered of pressure, of sudden firings, of quotas impossible to meet. Hale brushed off doubts with a smile too thin to trust. His presence alone chilled rooms, not through anger, but through the quiet certainty that he saw people as numbers. While Harlan once thought of him as ambitious, now, in the haze of betrayal, Hale's spotless reports felt like polished lies. And beneath the surface, Harlan sensed was a man who had already chosen efficiency over truth. The brisket arrived far too quickly. Harlan stared at the plate as if time itself had mocked him. Minutes, not hours, had birthed this meal. Emily, cheerful as ever, leaned closer with a smile and explained, almost joking, "We just spray it now, faster, easier." Her words landed heavier than the meat itself. He raised the fork, forcing a bite, and his mouth filled with something sharp, synthetic, almost metallic. It mimicked smoke, but without soul, like a lie seasoned into flesh. His stomach tightened. Betrayal was no longer theoretical. It sat steaming before him. He remembered oak logs burning in his grandfather's pit, the patience of dawn-to-dusk fires, the promise carved into every slice. Now it was reduced to liquid in a bottle sprayed casually as if tradition meant nothing. His mind whispered a question he could not silence. If it happened here, how many others were already lost? Harlan stayed seated longer than he needed, eyes narrowing on the kitchen beyond the service window. A young cook reached up, grabbed a brown spray bottle, and misted it over slices of meat without hesitation. No one flinched. No one questioned. Plates moved out to customers who smiled, who laughed, who ate without knowing the flavor was a fraud. The deception wasn't hidden. It was normalized, woven into routine. Emily passed by again, humming softly, her innocence making the truth sting sharper. He scanned the room, truckers, couples, families, none of them aware they were being fed a story instead of a tradition. His chest burned as realization set in. This wasn't an accident. This was practice repeated and perfected until no one saw it as wrong. And in that casual act of spraying, Harlan understood lies had become the new standard. The next stop gave him no relief. In a quieter town, he ordered brisket again. A waitress older than Emily, lines of exhaustion on her face, set down his plate with a tremor in her hands. She leaned, close voice low enough for only him. "Don't ask too many questions. It's policy now." Fear flickered in her eyes, deeper than fatigue, sharper than weariness. She moved away quickly as if even speaking risked punishment. Harlan's fork hung above the food, uneaten. This was no local shortcut. No rogue cook cutting corners. A word like policy meant instruction command orders passed from higher ground. The thought chilled him more than the chemical tang he already knew would be waiting. This wasn't isolated. This was systemic. And if fear kept employees silent, the corruption ran deeper than he imagined. The silence in that room felt like complicity, and it pressed heavy on him. The brisket at this second stop arrived as if copied from a template, identical slices, identical char, identical timing. The server smiled proudly and said, "We're more consistent than ever now." The pride in her voice struck harder than the food itself. To her, sameness was an achievement. To Harlan, it was proof that something essential had died. His grandfather's words rose unbidden. No smoke ever tastes the same. That's the truth of it. Wood-weather patience each day tells its own story. Authenticity had always carried imperfection, subtle variations that made each plate real. Now, uniformity stood in its place, a mechanical echo of what once lived. He looked at the brisket again, flawless, soulless. Rage simmered beneath his restraint, not at the waitress who believed she was serving progress, but at the unseen hand teaching her that perfection meant betrayal. The very consistency customers praised was, in truth, counterfeit. The third restaurant was crowded, the air filled with chatter and the sharp scent of artificial smoke. Harlan studied the kitchen, and what he saw chilled him. Meat moved along like parts on a conveyor belt, sliced, sprayed, plated, served. No slow tending of fire, no patient craft, only speed. Amid the rush, he caught sight of a face he knew, Frank Dawson, the old pitmaster. Shoulders hunched, Eyes dulled, he worked quietly until he leaned close enough for Harlan to hear. "We're lying to them." His words cut sharper than any blade. Harlan glanced at the room full of unsuspecting families, laughter mixing with the acrid haze. Frank's voice trembled as he muttered, "This isn't barbecue. It's theater." The smoky fog thickened, clinging to Harlan's skin, not with comfort, but with deceit. It was no longer just a suspicion, it was confirmation from the very man who had once been the keeper of truth. As Harlan prepared to leave, a hand brushed against his. A folded slip of paper was pressed into his palm so quickly he almost doubted it happened. He opened it under the table, heart racing. The message was scrawled in hurried strokes. "Don't trust the office. Someone's playing dirty." He looked up instantly, scanning faces in the crowd. Conversations continued. Plates clattered. No one met his gaze. Whoever had given it was already gone, swallowed by the flow of customers. The words burned in his hand like a live coal. Until now he had pieced together hints and whispers. But this was deliberate, a warning meant for him alone. His pulse thundered in his ears. There was no mistaking it. This was not negligence, it was conspiracy. And someone inside his own company wanted him to know the rot reached higher than he feared. Back in his hotel room, Harlan sat in silence, the curtains drawn tight. The taste of chemical smoke lingered on his tongue, the memory of the spray bottle refusing to fade. He opened his laptop, fingers heavy, and pulled up the company's internal reports. The dashboard glowed with green checkmarks, compliance perfect across every store, financial performance, steady customer satisfaction, stable, too clean, too polished. No empire, not even his, had numbers that perfect. He scrolled through page after page, waiting for cracks to show, but all he found was balance. The longer he stared, the less comfort the green boxes brought. They looked less like proof of health and more like camouflage. Somewhere beneath this manicured surface, something ugly had to be hiding. He knew the next document, the next column of figures could unravel everything. It was only a matter of time before the truth slipped through. He dug deeper, filtering expense categories most executives never noticed. That was where the strange entries surfaced: flavor enhancers, kitchen efficiency solutions, aromatic compounds. None matched the official supply chain. Each invoice was tucked beneath generic labels like miscellaneous supplies, almost invisible unless someone searched deliberately. The amounts weren't enormous, hundreds here, 1,000 there, but spread across hundreds of locations they formed a quiet flood. Every receipt carried just enough vagueness to avoid suspicion. But to Harlan, the pattern was unmistakable. This wasn't a mistake, it was design. Someone had built a second budget beneath his own small enough to slip past auditors, systematic enough to infect the company at scale. He felt his throat tighten. This wasn't about careless shortcuts. This was architecture calculated, hidden, and deliberate. The spray bottle was only the symptom. The disease was buried here in the numbers. He called Linda, voice low, urgency, masked as calm. She agreed to dig quietly. Hours later, she rang back, unsettled. "I found something strange," she whispered. Training manuals had been updated at odd hours, 2 a.m., 3 a.m., yet none bore signatures of approval. No memos announced them, no distribution records confirmed delivery. Still, the files existed, and in them instructions described optimized smoke solutions, step-by-step guides for efficiency that stripped away wood fire time. Linda hesitated before speaking again. "This isn't rogue managers. Someone higher is pulling strings." The silence that followed pressed heavy. These weren't random shadows, they were deliberate footprints. Harlan leaned back, pulse pounding, the weight of betrayal settling deeper. For the first time he understood the corruption wasn't confined to kitchens. It lived in the very files of his own headquarters. Frank sat hunched at the edge of a prep table, his eyes fixed on nothing. His voice carried the weight of someone who had watched too much decay without power to stop it. "You remember Tommy?" he asked. Harlan nodded faintly. Frank's jaw tightened. "Kid spoke up. Said this spray nonsense wasn't barbecue, said we were cheating folks. First they cut his hours, week by week, until he couldn't make rent. Then, suddenly he wasn't on the schedule anymore. Official word said he resigned. Truth is, he was starved out." Frank exhaled, his shoulders slumping as though each word pressed him lower. "We're paying for this with our honor, Harlan. Every plate we serve, every bottle we spray, it's a debt against the trust people once had in us." His hands trembled not from age but from the helplessness of watching principle traded for profit. Harlan felt fire rise in his chest, hotter than any pit flame. The betrayal was no longer abstract. It had names, faces, casualties. That night, Harlan's phone rang with an unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. A gravelly voice rasped through the line. "You're no regular customer. I've seen you watching." Silence followed before the voice returned. "If you want the truth, meet me at the Route 19 diner. Midnight. Ask for Ray." The call ended abruptly, leaving only the hum of static. Harlan sat motionless, pulse quickening. It could be a trap, or it could be the lead he desperately needed. Rain lashed the windows as he drove into the night, neon signs flickering along the highway like warnings. He gripped the wheel tighter each mile, steeping him deeper into doubt. The voice had carried both risk and urgency. Whoever this Ray was, he claimed to know more than whispers. And in the stormlit darkness, Harlan made his choice better to face danger than choke on silence. The diner was nearly empty chrome surfaces reflecting tired neon. In the far corner, a man sat with weathered hands wrapped around a mug of black coffee. His eyes were shadowed by years of smoke and labor. "Name's Ray," he said when Harlan approached. "Been smoking meat 22 years. His voice was gravel-lined with regret. He leaned forward, lowering his tone. 8 months back, a man named Davidson shows up. Fancy suit-polished briefcase. Said he was corporate sent to train us in a breakthrough method." Ray's mouth curled bitterly. Breakthrough was just a bottle. Same one you saw. Spray the meat, serve it fast. They called it innovation. His hands tightened on the mug. But it wasn't innovation. It was betrayal dressed up as progress. For Harlan, the name struck like a match. Davidson. A ghost no one at headquarters had mentioned. Now the shadow had a face, or at least the illusion of one. Ray's voice dropped lower, each word landing heavy. "Anyone who fights this gets erased." A buddy of mine stood up, said, "Customers deserve the truth." A week later, he vanished from the schedule. No calls, no warnings. Just gone. He rubbed his temples, exhaustion etched deep. The old-timers, the ones who still know how to tend a pit, most have been pushed into early retirement. Packages too tempting to refuse or hours cut until they gave up. And the younger staff. They think this is barbecue now. To them, the spray bottle is normal. They don't even realize they're part of a lie. The diner's lights hummed faintly, but the air felt drained of oxygen. Every detail painted the same picture, a company purging its conscience, silencing those who remembered the truth, reshaping the future with deception. For Harlan, it was more than fraud. It was cultural suffocation, an execution of everything his family had built. As Harlan prepared to leave, Ray reached across the table, voice steady. "Check the orders from 8 months ago. That's the key. Everything starts there." He slid a $5 bill under his coffee cup, then stood disappearing into the rain with the weary stride of a man who had carried too much truth for too long. Harlan sat frozen, gripping the note Ray had scrawled earlier. 2 words pulsed in his mind like a drumbeat flavor dynamics. The name lingered sticky and ominous, refusing to release him. He knew this wasn't just about stores or employees anymore. The trail ran through his own headquarters, buried in files no one was supposed to open. He tucked the paper into his jacket, resolve tightening in his chest. If the rot began 8 months ago, then the proof lived in the heart of his empire, and he would tear through its walls to find it. Before dawn broke, Harlan swiped his CEO card at the side entrance of corporate headquarters. The scanner blinked green. He still had access. The building was silent, the kind of silence that amplifies every footstep. He moved quickly to the training department files, stacked neatly as though untouched. He searched records, but no trace of Davidson existed, not in employee rosters, not in consultant logs. The man was a ghost. Yet, tucked inside the folder for temporary contracts, he found something far more damning, a payment voucher. D. Associates. Training services, $847,000, dated precisely 8 months ago. Harlan stared at the figure, nearly $1 million for services no one had ever approved, hidden in plain sight. His throat tightened as he photographed the document with trembling hands. Davidson may not exist on paper, but his shadow had drained company coffers. For the first time, the betrayal wore a price tag, and it was staggering. Harlan moved deeper into accounting, a maze of invoices and vendor codes. At first glance, everything looked harmless: cleaning supplies, equipment repairs, janitorial products, but the amounts and vendors nagged at him. He cross-checked the codes, and the truth surfaced like rot beneath fresh paint. These weren't mops or soap. They were small shipments of liquid smoke concentrate masked under harmless labels. Each order was modest: 500 here, 1,200 there, but together they piled into hundreds of thousands. One approval signature appeared again and again, tying the trail together. The name on every authorization chilled him more than any spray bottle could Richard Hale. The polished regional director champion of efficiency was not just endorsing the fraud, he was orchestrating it. The man who sold investors perfect graphs was the very hand-feeding poison into the company's roots. The numbers no longer whispered. They screamed. Hale wasn't just a cog, he was the key. At dawn, Harlan parked a discreet distance from Hale's home. When the director emerged, his gait was taut, his eyes darting as though hunted. Harlan followed quietly as Hale drove into the city, pulling up before a sleek glass building. Another man was waiting, tall, sharply dressed, carrying a leather briefcase. On the sidewalk, the two exchanged words too soft to hear. Then the briefcase opened. A thick envelope slid into Hale's hands. He thumbed through the cash, quickly, his lips shaping two words Harlan caught even from a distance, almost finished. The moment froze like a photograph. Hale, the respected executive, counting bribes in plain daylight. The image seared itself into Harlan's mind, undeniable proof of betrayal. It wasn't theory anymore. It was corruption caught in the open, and Hale stood at its center. But Harlan's instincts told him the story wasn't complete. He followed the unknown man who had handed Hale the envelope. The trail ended at a towering office downtown. The plaque on the entry wall struck harder than any revelation so far. Morrison Group, Hostile Acquisitions. The name was a blade cutting every scattered suspicion into shape. This was never about spray bottles, never about efficiency. That was only the smokescreen. The real plan was financial scheme to sabotage the company's reputation, drive down its stock price, and make it ripe for takeover. Customers were being deceived, but investors were the ultimate prey. Harlan felt his chest tighten as the pieces clicked into place. Morrison wasn't killing his family's legacy out of incompetence. They were starving it, strangling it to seize it whole. And Richard Hale was their inside man. Linda's voice was tight with urgency when she called. I dug into the server logs. Harlan. Every midnight edit traces back to Hale's account. She hesitated, then added, and not just edits. They required biometric sign-in. His fingerprints. Harlan's grip on the phone tightened. Shadow files had been crafted in the dark documents that mimicked corporate policy but were never authorized, never distributed. Policies instructing kitchens to abandon smoke coded in sterile language about efficiency and consistency. They carried all the authority of law without ever existing in the open. Linda whispered, he built a shadow company inside our own. To anyone looking casually, it appears legitimate. But the real policies, they were rewritten to erase truth. The revelation hung heavy confirmation that Hale wasn't just stealing, he was rewriting reality itself. What burned most was not just the deceit, but the precision. The lies weren't sloppy. They were engineered. As Harlan prepared his evidence, another wave hit him. A file appeared, circulating quietly among insiders' video footage of him at a blackjack table, stacks of chips before him. His face blurred just enough to stir doubt, but clear enough to wound. Accompanying it were fabricated bank records, cash withdrawals, debts, trails of addiction. The narrative was simple and lethal. Their CEO was gambling away trust, drowning in debt, desperate enough to cover his sins with fraud. His heart sank as he realized what was unfolding. This wasn't about removing him from the company. It was about destroying him completely, his name, his reputation, his legacy. A scandal like this wouldn't just stain. It would obliterate. And the worst part, the clock was already ticking. The board would see this evidence within hours. If he didn't act first, the story of Harlan Brooks would be written by the very hands that betrayed him. The boardroom was dressed in silence when Harlan entered. At the far end, Richard Hale sat, poised expression warm enough to be poison. Around the table, directors shuffled papers, tension crackling like static. The meeting opened, and Hale's voice carried the room, coated in faux concern. We're here today because serious allegations have surfaced. Allegations I wish weren't true. He glanced toward Harlan with the feigned sympathy of a wolf disguised as shepherd. Each word pulled the board closer to his narrative, setting Harlan up as the villain, the liability, the addict. The air thickened as if the room itself were bracing for verdict. It wasn't a meeting anymore. It was trial jury, already leaning toward Hale's polished lies. Harlan sat, straight pulse steadying. If this was a courtroom, then he would fight like a man with nothing left to lose. Hale rose smoothly, his voice crisp as he clicked a remote. The first slide flashed across the boardroom screen bank statements showing massive cash withdrawals in Harlan's name. Tens of thousands drained in rapid succession, each stamped with official seals. Murmurs rippled around the table. The next image appeared screenshots of hidden accounts balances rising and falling like waves. Finally, the blow he had saved for last, a video of Harlan in a casino chips, stacked high cards and hand expression caught between hunger and despair. It was a deep fake, but precise enough to make even friends doubt. Directors shifted uncomfortably, their confidence cracking. Papers rustled, chairs creaked. One whispered, "If this is true." Another shook his head but said nothing. Hale stood at the center like a conductor letting suspicion bloom. The paradox struck Harlan hardest, not that the evidence was convincing, but that the lies looked more believable than truth itself. Hale pointed directly across the table, his voice sharpened to a blade. "This is your CEO. A man gambling away not just money, but trust. A man who betrayed every one of you." The words fell like verdicts. Around the room, heads nodded, others frowned but stayed silent. The balance shifted visibly, as if the very walls leaned toward Hale's version of events. The directors no longer saw a leader, they saw a liability scandal waiting to erupt. Hale pressed his advantage, filling silence with righteous certainty. Harlan remained still, letting the storm build, refusing to grant Hale the satisfaction of defense. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, almost soft. "Wait a few minutes," he said, eyes steady. The room froze at his composure, though the tide seemed fully against him. His refusal to fight back now became its own gamble, one last cliff before either ruin or redemption. The clock struck 3. At that exact moment, a chorus of phones buzzed across the boardroom. Directors glanced down, confusion washing over their faces. A breaking news alert glowed on every screen, Channel 7 exclusive, inside the Smokey Joe's conspiracy. The broadcast unfolded in real time. Anchors revealed secret contracts with D Associates, hidden purchases from Flavor Dynamics LLC, and financial ties to Morrison Group's hostile acquisition unit. Graphics flashed evidence, scrolled employee testimonies played. Each revelation stacked like a hammer against Hale's fragile story. The boardroom moments, earlier alive with whispers, fell silent under the weight of exposure. Harlan watched as eyes turned not to him, but to Hale, eyes, now sharp, suspicious, demanding answers. What Hale had paraded as certainty was crumbling live on television, stripped bare before the entire city. For the first time, justice didn't whisper. It roared. The boardroom doors opened and 2 figures stepped inside. Linda, composed but fierce, carried a folder thick with files. Beside her walked Frank Dawson, shoulders bent but eyes steady, the weight of years behind him. Hale's face paled at the sight of the pitmaster he had silenced. Frank spoke first, his voice rough but resolute. "I was told to keep quiet, told to retire before my time. But I won't stay silent anymore. The truth deserves fire, not shadows." His words broke the silence like a crack of wood splitting. Linda laid documents across the table, digital signatures, timestamps, biometric logs. Every line pointed to Hale's account, every edit bearing his mark. No rumor, no guesswork, evidence carved in the code of the company itself. Directors leaned forward, faces changing. Doubt that once circled Harlan now circled Hale. For the first time, the current shifted. The allies Harlan once stood alone without had now arrived in full view. Hale stood abruptly, his polished calm fracturing. "This is a setup, an orchestrated plot to frame me." His words tumbled fast, desperate, but the door opened again and 2 uniformed officers entered. The taller one spoke evenly, reading aloud the charges: fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy. Hale's defiance collapsed into rage. He thrashed as the cuffs clicked shut, spitting venom across the room. "You think this ends me? I'll be back. This is only the beginning?" His voice echoed sharp and empty before the officers dragged him out. The room froze in the silence that followed. No one breathed. For the first time since the deception began, Harlan did not feel alone. He said nothing, only watched as the man who had hollowed out his company disappeared behind the boardroom doors. Hale's threat hung in the air like lingering smoke, but his reign was finished. 3 months later, the old kitchen in Austin glowed with fire again. Oak logs snapped and real smoke curled upward, carrying the deep, patient scent of hickory. Young employees gathered around as Frank Dawson, apron stained with years of labor, stood before them. His eyes softened, his voice steady. "Don't look at the clock," he said, resting a hand on the smoker. "The meat will tell you when it's ready." The room fell silent, every ear tuned to his words. They weren't just instructions on cooking, they were inheritance passed like scripture. Tradition was no longer buried. It breathed again alive in every ember. Harlan stood in the doorway watching the lesson unfold. The company had survived betrayal, deception, and near ruin. Now it was being rebuilt the way it began, slow, honest, unhurried. The legacy of smoke, once nearly stolen, had returned to its rightful place. Emily stood near the smoker, her eyes wide, absorbing every detail Frank offered. The flames painted her face with shifting light as she leaned closer, hesitant yet eager. "How do you know when it's ready?" she asked the question, innocent, but weighted with meaning. Frank's smile carried the warmth of a teacher. "You'll know," he said gently, "when your own heart feels soft." Emily's cheeks flushed and she nodded, holding his words as if they were treasure. Not long ago she had been a waitress who joked about spray bottles without knowing the storm her honesty would unleash. Now she stood transformed, entrusted with tradition itself. In company newsletters and meetings, she was introduced as the Heritage Ambassador, a living reminder that truth, however small, could save an empire. Her presence near the fire was proof that innocence, when paired with honesty, could become the fiercest guardian of legacy. Later that day, Harlan gathered employees in the courtyard behind the original store. Smoke drifted lazily above real smoke, this time carrying the weight of victory. He stood before them, not as a man cornered, but as a leader reborn. "We were betrayed," he said, voice steady, "but truth pulled us back. What nearly destroyed us has reminded us who we are." He paused, pointing to the smoker behind him. "This smoke is real." The crowd erupted in applause, loud cathartic echoing against brick and steel. For months, suspicion had hung over their heads like storm clouds. Now the air cleared. Employees clapped not just for Harlan, but for themselves, for surviving, for standing, for believing again. As he looked across the crowd, his shoulders lightened. The burden of doubt that once chained him had finally burned away. Inside the restaurant, a family gathered around a table, brisket steaming on their plates. A young boy lifted his fork, biting into the meat with the impatience only children carried. His eyes widened, instantly a smile breaking free. "Dad, the smoke tastes real," he exclaimed, voice bright. The father nodded knowingly, chewing slowly before answering, "It's because it is." Across the room, Harlan stood unnoticed, watching the exchange with a heaviness that softened into relief. The child's joy was not staged, not bought, but genuine, the pure response that had always mattered most. His vision blurred as emotion welled, not from sorrow but from recognition. The tradition was alive again, not in reports or slogans, but in the sparkle of a child's eyes and the proud nod of a father. In that moment, Harlan knew the battle had been worth every scar. Emily shared the tale of the spray bottle with a group of new hires. Their faces shifted from disbelief to awe as she spoke. She laughed lightly, though her eyes carried the memory's weight. One careless sentence, she said, and it saved the whole company. The rookies fell silent, recognizing the cost of dishonesty and the power of truth. That simple story spread from kitchen to boardroom, a living reminder that tradition could be shattered or preserved by the smallest voices. Linda unfolded the latest reports. Customer satisfaction had soared to record levels. The stock price climbed steadily, partners lined up to sign new contracts, and old clients returned with trust renewed. Around the boardroom, members exchanged nods of approval. Harlan leaned back, watching the figures with quiet certainty. It was never about the money, he said softly. It was always about trust. The room stilled, understanding that profit was only the shadow of something larger. What had been broken was now whole again. Harlan stood alone behind the original shop, the scent of real smoke rising into the Texas sky. He breathed deeply, knowing some traditions could never be sold, some truth could never be buried, and sometimes a single honest word could save an empire. The smoke drifted upward, carrying his vow. Authenticity is not optional, it's survival. If you believe in truth, demand it in every bite, every brand, every promise. Don't settle for shortcuts. Stand for what's real, because trust is the only flavor that lasts.